Welcome friends to another e-learning session from Brainpully, and today's topic is Introduction to PHP. So this is basically the third part of our major course, that is the worldwide technologies, and previously we had covered Introduction to HTML and CSS. So if you have not already seen those sessions, I will strongly encourage you that you please go back and see those sessions so that you have the basic required base to continue with this session. So what is PHP? So PHP is actually an open source stack, and it started within the Linux community, and basically it was a web engine or a web application engine developed on Unix stack initially. And the people in Unix, the open source guys, they have a habit of using something called recursive acronyms. So actually the full form of PHP itself is PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. So that is PHP. So what is this? This is an open source server-side scripting language. So we will go in little more detail in what is server-side and what is scripting language. But just for now, it's just an open source scripting language. It is a powerful tool to make dynamic and interactive websites, and it has other, like, it has been widely used for some times, and although it started with Linux, but it can run on Windows and Mac and other OS platforms also. And to this, as I mentioned, we need a basic knowledge of HTML, CSS, and if you have a knowledge of JavaScript, that is good, but not required at this point of time. So what can PHP do? So we will see how it does all those things, but just to see why we are learning this, why or what can PHP actually do. So it can generate dynamic pages. Okay. So till now, whatever we have learned in HTML and CSS, we learned how to create a beautiful website which user can go and check it out. But that is a static. Like, the content cannot change. Every time user opens it, it will be the same. But imagine if Facebook would have been like this. Like, anyone goes there and always whenever they open Facebook and they see the same page. So is that a good thing to have? Or if Facebook will say, okay, I will give you a dynamic thing. You can create your own home page or your own wall. But for that, you have to actually go there and write HTML. So will you do that? Will you use that, like, go to Facebook, write all your posts in HTML and then publish? So that is not what we want. We want an interactive service. Basically, it's now no longer a web page. We call it as a web service. Other examples like internet banking. So you can go there, you can log in. After login, you can do all kind of transactions. You can send money, receive money, see the reports. Other examples are like, so everything nowadays is a web service, a service which is presented on a website, which is dynamic, highly interactive, and you can go and change it. So how does we can do it? In HTML, we don't have option. In HTML, we can only present the page. But PHP and other server-side scriptings make us possible to generate that HTML on the fly. So with that, what we can do is basically we can generate dynamic page content. So we can have our page changing based on the user and the input given and the requirement. We can collect data, form data. We can open, read, write, close files on the server. So ultimately, whenever we do something, we want to get the data, we want to save the data and operate upon it. We will see more things like accessing cookies, modifying data in database. This is one of the most important thing in any service. For example, take a small service like a cab service. So you want a website for a cab service. Okay, cool. You can go there and create a very nice looking website in HTML and CSS. But if you want features like a user should be able to reserve a cab, or at least if they have booked a cab on phone, they want to see the status of the cab. So you would like to have a database where you will have all the data, like what is the cab number, what is the driver's name, driver's phone number, is it running on time or not. So all this will be stored in some kind of database, and we will learn how to access database so that I can make my website dynamic, have it changing. Whenever I go and change something in database, I want user to be able to see it. And then we will see how we can restrict access to this. So again, say you have booked a cab. Now I don't want the entire world to be able to see your data, like which cab you are booked, where you are going. Are you going to office or you are going to a cinema hall? So we will see how we can identify users, we can create usernames, passwords, and we can restrict user to only the specific content that is allowed to them. Best example again is Facebook. So you can post images, but then you have privacy. You can set that, okay, this image I want to show it to only user A, this image to all the users, and like that. So that's how we do the restricting mechanisms. We can encrypt, decrypt data. So there are a lot of things that a normal web service requires, and we can do all that with PHP. So how does it actually works basically? So there are special files, script files that are named with extension called .php. And whenever we try to request that file, and the server knows that, okay, this is a special request, this is not a HTML or a JavaScript or a CSS request. So it passes it to the PHP engine. So we will see those things later in details. So basically we write all our script or all our logic in a .php file. Server reads it, server runs it on the server, and ultimately we generate a web page only. So it will be a normal text file, it will be HTML file, it will have its own CSS, JavaScript, and along with that there will be PHP code. And finally it will be executed on the server. The result will be returned to the browser as a plain HTML. So while we will be writing an entire HTML page with the extension .php. We'll have our own PHP code inside it, which will run on server. But ultimately when user will see it, he won't be able to see the code. He will see only the result, and the result will be plain HTML. So let's see this in a diagrammatic view. So this is the initial block diagram that we had seen very initially in our introduction to World Wide Web technologies. So users will be multiple. There will be a lot of different users spread across the geographies which will be trying to access your web server. They will be interested in the services and the data provided by your web server. They will identify it with the IP address or a domain name or a port number, and basically by a URL. So it will be a URL. And whenever they get connected, they will kind of have a transparent communication. Although they will be connected through internet via multiple routers and other things, but whenever we say that they are connected, they will be like kind of connected transparently to the web service. They will do all the requests and the response will be getting in HTTP. So again, there is a protocol involved, it will be HTTP. And finally, whatever the server will send a HTML page, HTML document. And browser will be able to load that and show that content to the end user. So our entire goal in a PHP development will be to create a website or a service. We'll write programs which will return a valid HTML. So the output will always be a HTML that should be able to load in a browser. So for example, if we want to just print a number, we'll write something in HTML, or we will write something blank also. But if we want that number to be bold, we will use HTML tags to present that make it bold. So PHP doesn't decide how things will be represented or visible. PHP just decides what the output content will be. And you want to show it in a particular way, beautify way, you want to show the table in data in a table, all you have to do it in HTML and CSS. So here we have already seen how client works, how the browser works, what is HTML and HTTP. Now in this session we will be specifically focused on the web server. So we will see what goes inside web server, how I request something, something gets processed, and how can I see the result. So for that we have something called an application stack. So this entire box is a web server. So when I say server, this is a complete system or an end system. It consists of a hardware, so definitely there is some hardware. On that, an operating system is running. It can be Windows, Linux, Solaris, Mac. Above that, there will be a web server software running, which will actually handle the HTTP request, so that we don't burden ourselves with the HTTP request. We don't want to be involved into like what port it is using or how to send a particular packet and receive it. We won't. So we will let the web server software handle that. So most probably it will be Apache or IIS. People who develop websites using Apache Tomcat and JSP pages, they use a web server called Apache Tomcat. Then in somewhere between, we will have a database where we will save the records. So it's not always required to have a database, but it again depends on the software, and mostly we deal with data, so we need a database along. Else there can be websites which are purely file based, or it's like it purely generates some data from somewhere, but we'll consider that we need a place where we can read and write data. So we'll have somewhere a database. Above that, there will be a scripting engine. So scripting engine is something like we need to write some logic which will define that how to read, when to read, how to restrict, and all those kind of things. So for writing that, we need a mechanism, we need a language which the server understands. So whatever till now we have learned, HTML, CSS, is all about which browser understands. So now we need a mechanism to write some logic which server understands and can run for me. So for that we need the engine. So for example, in this case, in our this session, we will be writing things in PHP. So we need a mechanism by which server should understand PHP. And above that, I will create my own application. So this is purely business logic. For example, I want to create a booking system for a movie theater. So I will create the logic like how many seats are there, what are the different types of seats, what is the cost, how to take payment, how to print receipt, will I allow 4-day advance reservation or 6-day advance reservation, and those kind of things. So that is purely our application. So this is what our logic is. So this collection is known as a stack because it works in a layer. OS, above OS we have application server, web server, database, script, and other things. Not exactly in this order, but this is kind of the layers which are minimum required for an active modern web application. So it's not mandatory that we use PHP, or it's not mandatory that we use it on Windows, but every architecture will have this kind of layering. So some other examples are, there's a LAMP stack that we have seen that stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. We have an equivalent version on Windows, that is Windows, Apache, MySQL, PHP. We will be using this stack. Then we can have it like Windows, IIS, Microsoft SQL Server, and then again some server-side scripting. It can be PHP, it can be ASP.NET, it can be ASP C#, or any other compatible technologies. There was a very famous application stack initially from Java. So they used to run the server on either Linux or Solaris, and then they have Apache Tomcat, MySQL, and JSP. JSP as the scripting engine. So let's look at the stack in a little more detail in a proper way, how that information flows through this stack. So it all starts with the web browser, end user. Ultimately, user is the one who needs things. So he will send a query. He will send a page request that I want to see the list of available seats in my booking system. So there will be a request for a service. It will be most probably through internet, but when we develop it locally on our system, all these things can be in the single system also. It may not be only internet, it can be intranet also. So for example, I have a big office and I have a local internal website. for my employees to share information. So it can be intranet also, but ultimately there will be an entity called web server. So web server can be an independent dedicated hardware, it can be a software, but ultimately it will be running something called a web server software. So all requests will go to the web server software. By default, HTTP runs on port number 80. So by default, whenever we write websites and all, they all run on port number 80. So there will be a software, Apache, which will be listening to that particular port. Whenever browser says, okay, go and fetch that address, it will connect to that server, connect to port number 80 and do some request that I want this image file, I want this HTML file, I want this JSP file. So whenever there is normal static pages, the Apache will directly go to the file system, look for that file and pick it up. And it will return the content to the end browser and browser will show it up. But whenever I request something with .php, again this is configurable, this can be changed, but by default the resources are identified by extension, and by default .php files, whenever I request, it doesn't directly go to the static files. What it does is, there is another software component running, not as a separate process but as a module to the Apache, and it says that while we initially actually start Apache, at that time it configures and says all the .php requests, don't you do anything with them, give it to me, I will handle them. So they get into a negotiation initially, and next time onward, whenever we ask any .php, Apache says, okay, it's a .php request. It sends it to the PHP parser and says, please take care of this. Then internally, it runs the script, R script. If required, it interacts with the database. It can read data from database, it can load data from database, it can update, search and do all those things. Compose a new file, internally a temporary file will be composed, and that file will be passed to Apache. Again, it may not be a physical file, it will be in memory, but it will be a new HTML content. And then Apache will send it back using HTTP to the web browser. So ultimately, when the web browser sees the content, it sees only HTML. It sees nothing of the code. And that HTML is whatever we want to show. So that's how that HTML is dynamically generated at this point, and it is not statically saved here. And based on this, we can do whatever we want with it. So, but how does this all work actually? Okay, we saw the diagram, we saw, okay, it's a cool technology, but how do I actually do it myself? So what we have to do is, we have to learn PHP definitely. We should be able to write programs. So that will we do going forward. But say assume we had created something, we have it ready, or we are about to be creating something. So definitely we will be writing in them .php files, right? Like last time we wrote .html files, .css files. So now whatever we will do, we will write in .php files, and then either I will put it in a website which is hosted at a location which supports PHP by default. So simplest can be, you can rent something and you can rent a server and put your PHP files there and see how it works. You can call your IT guy and tell him to, okay, please set up PHP for me, and he will set it up, and he will say, okay, PHP setup, now you can put your programs and you can run. If not, you can install the stack on your own PC, which I think most people will do initially so that you can experiment on it. So what you can do, you can either go and manually install a web server. With Windows professional versions, by default IIS comes with it. So you can have that web server. You can install PHP on that. So PHP is again available as a standalone package. So if you have a Linux system, you will get Apache already installed. If you have Windows system, you will get IIS already installed. Over that you can install PHP. You can go to php.net. download it and install it. And finally, if you want to use database, you can again go to MySQL, or there are other SQLs also like PGSQL, SQLite. You can go there, you can download those packages, set it up, and but for this session, I won't go into details of those. What I will do is I will use a pre-packaged stack that is called WAMP, Windows Apache MySQL PHP. Again, if you do all these things on a Windows, it will become the same stack only. But for experimentation and learning, there is a very nice, cute package available at the website called wampserver.com/en for English version of that page. There you can just go download. It's a single package which you just install, click next, 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 and it will set it up entire Apache, MySQL, and PHP on your local system. So that I have already done on my system. We will, after a short time, we will have a demo where we will see how the PHP stack is there. So let's assume that we have set it up. Then what? So in the next session, so specifically, we will actually see the learning part of it. So we will see how we can start writing PHP. Then we will learn about the PHP in detail. So we will learn the language, we will learn how we can write comments in it, we will learn how we can take input and output from PHP. We will learn what are the basic important keywords, operators. So ultimately, any programming language, what we want to do, we want to handle data, we want to receive data, we want to compute over data, then we want to present that data back. So we will be, that's why we will be seeing input and output, how we can receive, how we can present. We will see operators, how we can operate on that data. We will see then few more features like any other programming languages, like how to handle conditions, how to iterate through loops, how to write our own functions, and in the last we will see a list of library functions. Along this path, so this is a very high level just pointers, but along this path only we will in between somewhere see more detail about more data types, specific data types, and towards the end of this section we will see how to connect to MySQL database and read and write through them. How to write PHP. So we will have a demo, but before demo, just in a quick slide, I want to just summarize few things. So as we mentioned, PHP scripts are written in a file called .php. So that the server can understand that it is not a plain HTML file. I have to pass it through the PHP server, PHP processor. So it will be a normal HTML, because ultimately when it will be processed and sent to the browser, it has to be HTML to be presented. In between, whenever I want to write PHP, I will use a tag called $ankle PHP, and I will close it with $PHP. So this is one tag, and this is not a HTML tag. It is a special tag for the browser. Notice that after $ankle PHP, there is no space, and PHP is in a small letter. So although HTML is case insensitive, CSS is case insensitive, PHP is not. PHP, again, as it has been derived from the open source community on Linux, who were very fond of C, shell scripting, and other Perl and Ruby kind of scripting. So you will, going forward, you will see if you have any experience of these languages, PHP is very similar to these languages, because the entire open source community who developed PHP came from a C and Linux background basically. So that's why PHP is code case sensitive, and the syntax is very much similar to C programming, C programming mostly. So these are the special tag, ankle $PHP and $ankle. This is the closing, opening and closing, and we will write all the PHP code in between. So for example, this is an example where I have written a comment. So // is a C++ style commenting. In C++, we just put / and we write a comment. This won't be executed. And see the second example. What I have done is, till this, it's a normal HTML. Ankle exclamation doc type HTML. This is the HTML header. Then we have the HTML body, h1 my first PHP page, heading close, and then I have anchor question mark PHP, and my statement is echo hello world. So again, if you know little bit of shell scripting, echo is a keyword from shell scripting where they use this to print something. So then in echo, double quotes and the message, whatever I write, will be printed, and then body close and HTML. So when we run this, as I mentioned, ultimately the browser will be able to see only the result HTML, not the code. So in browser, it will be like HTML body h1, content inside h1, and then just hello world, and body close HTML close. They will not be able to see the ankle PHP and the echo part of it. So now let's have a demo of this, and after that we'll take a short break. So for this session, I have already installed WAMP on my system. I will just so once I install WAMP on Windows system, it will come as the subgroup called WAMP server, and there will be an option called start WAMP server. Once I start that, I will see a small W icon in my status bar. If everything is okay, it will go green. If there is any problem or a conflict with existing software, it can be red or brown. So common sources of conflict is if your system already have a IIS server installed, so the port number will be busy, or if you have Skype or any other software, because Skype is also a software which takes the port number 80 and occupies it. So you can exit Skype, you can close IIS server, and then try to launch it. So if everything goes well, it will be shown as green, and if you click it, you will see all the options. So the local host, PHP myadmin, these things will go later, and you can see the folder for Apache, PHP, MySQL. So these are the three components which comes with this, and you can start all service, stop, restart, put online. So by default, when WAMP starts, it is in the local mode only. So you can access this server from the same system, same local system. But if you want it to be accessible from other system also, so say you have a system 1 and you have created a website in system 1 and you want system 2 to be able to use it, and you are using WAMP to host, you need to put it online. So this is the WAMP server and how to start. So where should I start programming? Where should I program? So as I mentioned in my previous slides, so WAMP comes with Apache, and it picks it up all the data from one location. So that is known as a root of a web server, a root location or a root folder. So that you can see here from www root directory. So when I click this, it will open me whatever is the WAMP's root directory, and that root directory by default is c:/wamp/www. So here we put whatever pages will be available to access from root directory. Okay, so we have the WAMP running, we have the icon green. By default, we have some pages here, and if you see, there's already a page called index.php. So indexes are the default page. So if I try to open my server now and I don't give an address, it will try to open this page by default. Okay, how to open? Can I just right click and say open it on Internet Explorer? Actually, I cannot, because if I right click and say open with, if I just right click and say open or open with, the browser will try to open the file. It will not ask it through the web server. I want it, the browser, to ask through web server. So let's try both the things. So definitely we know that this file has to be opened from Firefox, or say we create a new file. We say right click, new, and we will create a new file, or let's use Notepad++, that's better. So we want a new PHP file. I go save as, I have to put this file in the web root directory. So I will go to the root directory, C, WAM, www. Here I will select all type, and I will use a file name, say uh, my first dot php. When I say save, I can go to that location and see my first dot php is here. So I know it's HTML only, so let's write a simple HTML. I save it. HTML body, welcome to PHP. So this is still a normal HTML. There is no PHP inside this. Only the extension of the file is PHP. So definitely PHP processor will try to process it, but he will not find any PHP in it. So it will just return that entire page as is. But okay, let's see. So I said that we should not right click and just open it with the Firefox or something. So say I just take it and I select it, say Firefox. Okay, but it is coming. Okay, now let's try to write some PHP and then see. Welcome to PHP. So this is the PHP opening and closing tags. Inside I write a command, echo hello world. Welcome to PHP, and I say echo hello world. Now let's go there, refresh this page, but see it is not come. Okay, now notice what is the address. It says file : / and the file path. So with this you can notice that this is actually not asking the web server at all. What it is doing, it is directly going to that location, C, WAM, www and my first.php, and it is trying to load that file as is. If I right click here and see the source, we can actually see the PHP source inside it. And browser do not understand what is PHP. So he just ignores this part. See that it has been entirely marked in red. So what I have to do is, I have to actually ask this through server. Okay, so I have the server WAMP running. I have the file in its root path. How do I ask it? So I have to ask it through the address of the server. If my server is some other system, I can directly use the IP address. Here also I can use the IP address. For that I have to be in network and call it. But if I don't have an IP address, what I can do is I can use a name, special name called localhost. So this is a special name for the self server, like my server is local on this system only, and I can press enter. So by default it is on port number 80, so I don't have to specify a port, and this is the default index page of my PHP that we have seen. The index.php. So this is the default page. Now I want my page, not the default page, so I have to tell it / my first.php. Now notice I have welcome to PHP hello world. If I go to right click and say view page source, notice there is no PHP code inside it because server had executed that code, generated a new HTML and sent it back to me. So as I mentioned, our entire goal now onward will be to create HTML pages only. but dynamically and valid HTML pages, which the browser can view. So with this, we conclude the first part of this session. Going forward, we will see more into PHP.